Dear students, I will show you kidneys and ureters and vessels of the retroperitoneal space. This is the right kidney. How did I know that? Because I have to recognize renal vein, renal artery and ureter. In the hilum, first we have renal vein, posteriorly we have renal artery, and inferiorly we have ureter. Now I know that is the right kidney. When you see kidney on the final exam, please check where is the vein. Anteriorly we have right renal vein, because this is the right kidney. Posteriorly we have right renal artery, and inferiorly we have right ureter. Now we know this is the right kidney. You have to recognize right renal superior pole, right renal inferior pole, borders or margins, right renal lateral border and right renal medial border. In the middle of the right renal medial border we have renal hilum. This is the right renal anterior surface. This is the fibrous capsule of right kidney. Anteriorly we have right renal vein in hilum. Posteriorly and superiorly we have right renal artery, and posteriorly but inferiorly we have right ureter. First I have to check the size of the kidney. I see anteriorly left renal vein. I know that is the left kidney. I have to recognize left renal superior pole, left renal inferior pole, left renal lateral border, left renal medial border, left renal anterior surface, left renal vein, and left renal artery. Now inside the kidneys, this is the sagittal section. We can recognize only ureter. We cannot see the artery and vein. It doesn't matter if it is the right or left. Now we have to recognize periphery. This is the renal cortical labyrinth or renal cortex. Parts of the renal cortex between pyramids is renal column. Here we have two renal columns. This is the renal pyramid. Apex of the renal pyramid is the renal papilla. Now you have to recognize minor renal calyx. Minor renal calyx fuse and form the major renal calyx. Major renal calyx continue with renal pelvis, and renal pelvis continue with ureter. This is the left kidney. I know because I recognize left renal vein and left renal artery. On the periphery we have renal cortex or renal cortical labyrinth, renal column, renal pyramid, and renal papilla. From the renal papilla we have minor renal calyx. Minor renal calyx fuse and form major renal calyx. Major renal calyx fuse and form renal pelvis, and renal pelvis continue with ureter. You can see here minor renal calyx, major renal calyx, renal pelvis, and ureter. This is another sagittal section. You have to recognize renal cortex or renal cortical labyrinth. Parts of the renal cortex between pyramids, renal column, renal pyramid, and renal papilla. Now we have here the three minor renal calyxes. You have to recognize minor renal calyx, major renal calyx, renal pelvis, and right ureter. How did I know that is the right ureter? Because I recognized right renal vein and right renal artery. This is the right kidney. We have to recognize here the blood vessels. You have renal interlobar vein, which fuse and form right renal vein. This is the right renal artery. Right renal artery give us the renal segmental artery. Renal segmental artery continue with renal lobar artery. Renal lobar artery ascending and form the renal interlobar artery. Renal interlobar artery give us the arcuate artery, and finally in cortex we have renal interlobular artery. Here we have left kidney with left ureter. This is the abdominal aorta. The first unpaired branch is celiac trunk. The second is superior mesenteric artery. This is the left renal artery. Right and left testicular or ovarian artery. Right and left common iliac artery, and from the left side left external iliac artery and left internal iliac artery. This is the left renal vein. Now you have to recognize left kidney, left ureter and left suprarenal gland. This is the anterior surface of left suprarenal gland. Here we have abdominal aorta, celiac trunk, superior mesenteric artery. This is the left renal vein. Tributary of the left renal vein are left suprarenal vein and left testicular or ovarian vein. I think you will recognize here right and left kidneys. On the right and left kidneys you will recognize superior, inferior pole, lateral and medial border and anterior surface of kidney. You will recognize abdominal aorta and left renal artery and right renal artery. Right from the aorta is the inferior vena cava, and you will recognize right renal vein and left renal vein. Left suprarenal vein is tributary of left renal vein. Here you will recognize left ureter, right ureter, abdominal aorta, and you will recognize left suprarenal gland. This is the branch of the abdominal aorta, celiac trunk. This is the inferior phrenic artery, parietal branch of abdominal aorta. This is superior mesenteric artery, inferior mesenteric artery. This is the right common iliac artery and left common iliac artery. From the right side we have right internal iliac artery and right external iliac artery. This is the inferior vena cava, inferior phrenic vein, descend parallel with inferior phrenic artery. This is the right renal vein and left renal vein. From the left suprarenal gland we have left suprarenal vein, and inferiorly from the left renal vein we have left testicular or ovarian vein. The left testicular or ovarian vein and left suprarenal vein are tributaries of the left renal vein. The left renal vein is tributary of inferior vena cava. This is the retroperitoneal space with vessels and organs. Only the spleen is a part of the intraperitoneal space. Here we have right and left kidneys and right and left suprarenal glands. Left from the vertebral column is abdominal aorta. The unpaired branches of abdominal aorta, visceral branches, are celiac trunk, superior mesenteric artery, and inferior mesenteric artery. Paired visceral branches are right and left middle suprarenal arteries, right and left renal arteries, and right and left testicular or ovarian arteries. The abdominal aorta bifurcates and divides into the common iliac arteries, right and left. Terminal branches of right and left common iliac arteries are external iliac artery and internal iliac artery. In front of sacrum, you will recognize unpaired parietal branch. It is the middle sacral artery. Tributary of the inferior vena cava are left and right renal vein and left and right testicular or ovarian veins. You will recognize muscles like psoas major, quadratus lumborum, iliacus, muscles from the lateral abdominal wall like external oblique abdominal muscle, internal oblique abdominal muscle, and transverse abdominal muscle. In anterior abdominal wall we have rectus abdominis. Dear students, if you have questions, please send me email.